Hello and welcome to episode 84 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by Akil Walton, a seasoned executive with a career spanning HR, talent development, and organizational effectiveness at some of the world's leading companies, including Apple, Amazon, and Eaton Corporation. In this episode, Akil shares his journey from Cleveland, Ohio to global leadership roles. We discuss the importance of active listening in both professional and personal settings and provide practical insights on how communication drives engagement and profitability. Whether you're leading a team or simply looking to improve your interpersonal skills, this conversation is packed with valuable lessons. Let's dive in. Akil, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Really looking forward to the conversation. Before we jump too far into it, why don't you maybe just tell the listeners a little bit about you, your career background, and the great work that you're doing today?
Absolutely. Well, I was actually born in Cleveland, Ohio, left when I was 4, and went to the Virgin Islands, St. Croix, and was in St. Croix until 15, and moved back to Cleveland, Ohio, where I finished high school, as well as went to college at Bowling Green State University for undergrad. I have a wife and 2 kids, 2 daughters, beautiful daughters. They live in North Carolina, where I live as well. And one is a marketing professional, and the other one's a chemist. And my wife is an IT professional.
Outstanding. So yeah, I'm an Ohio guy as well. Grew up northeastern Ohio, the Youngstown, Warren area. So that transition from Cleveland to the Virgin Islands and back, that's a little bit of a shocking transition, but both great places.
Yes, and I'll talk about it a little bit later about language, right, and communication coming from the Virgin Islands to obviously the United States.
Absolutely. And so from a professional background, maybe share just a little bit about some of the work you've done, orgs you've been at, and the work that you're doing today.
Absolutely. So I started my career at UPS in HR and did a lot of work there as an HR generalist, if you will. So recruiting, employee relations, all of those different types of facets, training of union and non-unionized employees. And then I actually went into business where I worked for a company called All Hold, which is a grocery retail chain out of Denmark. And I worked for the USA division where I actually had a P&L, a profit and loss statement that I managed. And they actually grew me up to that point. And then once I left there, understanding how businesses make money, loses money, I went back to school with that ammunition in industrial organizational psychology, where I majored in industrial organizational psychology in undergrad and also majored in sociology. And so as I continue to move through that continuum, if you will, with my career, I worked for a company called Security Life Insurance, and that was in Hartford, Connecticut. And then another company called ERC, which is a management consulting firm, where there was just industrial organizational psychologists and technologists. And what we did was a lot of work for the Goldman Sachs and Planet Hollywoods and all of that on psychological assessments that we would do to determine batteries of tests to use for assessing and selecting candidates for multiple different types of jobs, but also 2 cultural assessments, back then called satisfaction surveys, eventually then engagement surveys and things like that. But we also did a lot of different research on predicting who would leave companies and predicting who would actually join companies and giving that information over to our clients. Then I went to a company called Bayer out of Leverkusen, Germany. And in that role, I actually did a lot of work in the corporate training and development and OD space. And as I continued throughout my career, I worked for a company called Eaton Corporation, and I was the head of talent and organizational effectiveness for their electrical division, and then moved into a corporate role where I get promoted into the Director of Organizational Research, Analysis, and Strategic Planning for Eaton Corporation globally. And if I keep going, there's a lot of different roles, but eventually ended up with companies like Apple, where I was the head of HR for several of their lines of businesses, as well as Tech Data, now called TD SYNNEX, where I was the vice president of talent and organizational effectiveness for them. Also did business transformation from an HR perspective. And then went into Amazon, companies like Amazon as well. So long career, all of it mostly in the talent and organizational effectiveness space, focused on how do you help companies win through people.
Love that. How do you help companies win through people? And yeah, gosh, as I look at that background, one, not only just an impressive amount of experience and impressive experience, the diversity of the organizations. I was just jotting some things down here, whether it's in, retail, grocery, e-commerce, shipping and logistics, consulting, manufacturing, so much experience. And I would just have to imagine throughout that career journey, working at very impressive organizations like this, having the opportunity to interact with so many people, you're coming across people that are just fantastic communicators. And as you think of those folks, there's probably some common themes that you would see stand out, right? So when you hear that somebody is a great communicator, from your experience, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, what that means to me is that person has high emotional intelligence, first and foremost, primarily because when you're listening to someone, you want to actively listen and make sure that they feel like you're hearing them. Because if you're going to communicate with them, you need a really good exchange and you need to understand where that person is coming from. And that's reciprocal. So that's one thing that I think of. The other thing that I think of is someone who has really good plethora of skills that relates to communication, such as written communications. That person knows how to write in a way that in which the tone, but also the key message is received appropriately. Now, we don't always find success every single time we do that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But when I think of someone who is really good at communicating, I think about that as well. And then, of course, the, I would say, verbal communications, where they're able to articulate themselves in a manner that allows for people to understand what they're saying pretty clearly, but also be engaged in the message because they are in big understanding of who's in front of them. And so that audience that they're speaking to or speaking with is very clear to the person who's communicating, so that they're communicating things that are relevant, meaningful, purposeful. Those things are extremely important as they're articulating orally what they're delivering to that particular audience.
The key theme that I picked up on there when it comes to effective communicators, if I'm catching this right, is it's so much as a focus on the other person. And I think that's
Correct.
where a lot of people miss the mark when they think about effective communicators. They're thinking about, do they have a good voice? Do they have an extensive vocabulary? Are they comfortable on stage? Do they have this executive presence? But really, so much of effective communication comes down to understanding that other person's perspective, where they may be coming from,
Yes.
really listening to what they're saying, and making sure that your message, in essence, is tailored to that specific individual or perhaps that audience that you're delivering it with, your tone, with, as you mentioned, is it relevant to them? Is it important to them? So for folks listening to this idea that you can be a great communicator just by being, an exciting, charismatic person really is not the case. That's just one element, one layer of it, but so much of it, the majority of it really goes back to, can you understand other people and can you structure your communications in a way that's going to resonate with them?
Absolutely. And there's a person that I think of as I kind of communicate through that. One CEO that I worked very closely with, who a lot of times when he had meetings and pretty intense discussions, and he was really quiet, some people perceive that as being not engaging, not strong. I perceive it as he's communicating extremely well right now.
Oftentimes, a lot of what you say is what you don't say. Not only just, a non-response is a response, but when you're listening, especially based on your body language and messages that you're putting out there, listening is a form of communication. And I've had that feedback throughout my career that a lot of times leaders felt maybe I wasn't engaged or I wasn't adding a whole lot, but it's, my style very much is listen, process. I'm going to share when I feel that I have something meaningful and relevant, not just for the sake of talking. Yeah. So it is important as you think about this. Sometimes when somebody may not seem engaged, they actually are very engaged. They're just taking it all in and processing it because that's really their style.
Correct. That's right.
So with the work you're doing today, I know you're doing consulting with a lot of organizations. As you're out there, what are some of the key communication skills that you're hearing about or that you're seeing that are either maybe lacking that are important, or organizations that are thriving, right? They have employees that are really doing well with these particular skills. What, in essence, what's important to be successful in the workplace today?
Yeah, and I think it really depends on the industry and the level as well that you're communicating to. But in high change management types of situations, the frequency matters. And not only the frequency, the positioning and the purpose matters. So what I see as really effective is short, more frequent, meaningful, purposeful, very relevant types of communications coming out that doesn't seem like it's bombarding, and it doesn't seem like it's not a what's in it for me, why I should know this. And so tailoring, customizing, segmenting messages that might be similar but different for different types of roles, levels, things like that, especially in change management types of issues that you're dealing with or opportunities that you're going after. I think that's really critical. The other thing is maybe some of the visualization of change or visualization of a message. So instead of using words, you use different types of pictorial visualizations so people can see exactly what you're going after, or they can have their own interpretation. You have great discussions around it. Because the more that you engage others around the communication and be able to give them opportunities to maybe provide their own input and perspectives, tends to be pretty good as well. Then the last thing that I would say that I see, especially more on the cutting edge of things, is making sure that when you're utilizing technology from a communications perspective, that you're doing that in a way that is global, especially if you have an organization that is multinational, is making sure that you use the technology in a way that allows for language change, different types of times in which that message is going to land in that particular country, ensuring that the tone of that language within the technology and how it's distributed is landing appropriately. So those types of things are really important organizationally. But from a leadership perspective, there's nothing more than just being genuine and being clear, articulating yourself in a way that shows that you care about not only the people, but the company, the products, the customers, so forth and so on. That's the most important, that I think throughout the test of time, those qualities and characteristics still hold true.
Spot on. As I think about that, right, you could have lots of messages that are adapted for different audiences, that are culturally relevant based on where they're going out into the world. They're hitting the inboxes at the right, all that type of stuff. But if it's not coming across in an authentic way, right? It's just people can tell maybe it's tone deaf, or the level of understanding of the needs of the audience just isn't there, the message is not going to resonate. It's going to fall flat. And a couple of guests in the past have talked about this when you have important communications. As you mentioned, there's change management, there's lots of change going on in an organization. You can't approach your communications as a one and done, right? Either
No.
one guest talked about it as a campaign style, start to think of it almost as a marketing campaign.
Yeah.
Another guest talked about having a playbook. Like you're that NFL coach and you have
Yeah.
this playbook for this communication as to what's going to happen when, if this happens, here's what we're going to put out. And just kind of really thinking across, how you're communicating. And I think even if we boil it down, say a couple levels, if you're a mid-level manager in an organization and there's a lot of change going on. I think through my career when I used to work for a much larger organization, we would go through reorgs and changing of priorities or moving different business units. Anytime that I would go and meet with the senior leadership team, I'd go out to HQ. Every time I came back, even if there were no major updates, I would get communications out to my team just to let them know what's going on.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes that silence and not hearing anything is way worse than
Yes.
if you put something out, because people are going to create their own story in their head, right? In the absence of communication, people write their own stories. That's why it's important, as you mentioned, the frequency of it, the timing of it, and the tone of it all are going to play a factor in it.
Absolutely. That is absolutely right. And it's so critical because if you don't do that, then your destiny is not in your own hands anymore. It trickles into other things that you don't necessarily want people talking about because it's not true, right? So you want to make sure that you're giving them facts, information, meaningfulness, purpose, all of those different types of things relevant to them.
Akil, shifting gears a little bit, starting
Sure.
maybe look inwards. We talked a little bit about some of the skills that
Yeah.
are out there with employees that are succeeding, or what organizations need to do well. If you think through your career journey, as we talked about at the start of this, some great roles working for household name organizations. If you had to boil it down to say one skill, like what's the key skill that really helped you to have that level of success in your career to get to where you are today, what would you say that key communication skill would be?
Yeah, it's hard to boil it down to one, but if I had to, it's actively listening. And the reason why I use the word active before listening is because that's a skill. It's not easy to do, it's easy to say.
Mhm.
And so when someone's talking to me, especially with things that are very complex and emotional, and it has maybe someone's career tied to it or customer, um, some sort of customer need behind it that we need to deliver on. In other words, it's critical. That's even more important when you want to, use this active listening. But what that means to me is you're not thinking about anything else except what that person is saying. And you're also looking at the nonverbals of that person to understand the words that are coming behind the nonverbals. And then the other thing that you want to be able to do is pause when that person stops and make sure that you're processing, and then provide something that might be either a question for better understanding or maybe a few things to continue the conversation just to make sure that you're both on the same page, getting that clarity. And people really appreciate that, primarily because then they start to see that, wow, your listening is actually benefiting the conversation because you understand where I'm coming from. You understand exactly the problem, the issue, the opportunity. And not only that, you understand the emotion behind it. So the active listening to me is number one. If I had to pick a second, the way that you communicate that back to the person is also important. Using, especially with the body language, your articulation is important, but also too, looking someone in the eyes and showing that same type of or similar emotion is important. of how much you care and how engaged you are. That reciprocation is so critical, but you can't get that without actively listening.
You nailed it right there. You can't do one without the other. And
Right.
lots of people want to talk about listening and active listening, and they feel that they're good listeners. The key point that you mentioned is when you truly are actively listening, you're not thinking about anything else
Right.
other than what that person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally. And that is very difficult to do unless you've really started to eliminate as many distractions as possible. So, for example, when I do these, I talk about this a lot with my listening hygiene. My office door is closed. If the family is home, a text message goes out, "Hey, I'm recording a podcast. I don't come to the door, don't knock, don't disturb me unless the house is on fire. Don't come knocking." Right?
Right.
Outlook is shut down. Teams is shut down with do not disturb. My phone completely off. I don't want anything coming through. And
Yes.
even when I do this or say key client meetings, I do my best to not schedule something critical directly after this.
Yeah.
Because what I don't want to be doing is having this conversation with you, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I gotta wrap this up. I gotta hurry up. I have to prep for my next meeting. I'm meeting with the CEO or meeting with one of our big clients. So I try to create an environment where I truly can. I don't have distractions. I already have a list of questions I'm going to ask you. So I've done my legwork
Yes.
up front. I've done the prep, which is another key component to being able to actively listen is to prepare,
That's
whether it
right.
is just jotting down questions, jotting down goals, whatever. Every conversation is going to be different, but
Right.
you have to prepare. There's a lot that goes into listening before the conversation even starts.
You're totally right. I mean, preparation is key. And obviously, and some of your listeners would say, "Well, I don't have time to prepare all the time." You know what? That's why actively listening is so good, because when you're not able to prepare, the better you listen actively, it helps you prepare for how you're going to approach the situation that is meaningful and relevant for that person. Whether you're doing a performance discussion with someone, all the way to are you talking to your spouse about what we're going to eat tonight? So the range of active listening as a skill, it goes everywhere. So even multiculturally. So that's important to make that distinction too.
Absolutely. And if I even think of just with my kids, right? I notice when I'm talking with them, they come in after a practice or come in after school and they're talking. When I just do the subtle shift of putting my phone down or shutting down maybe what's on my screen, if they come into my office and turn to them, just physically turn my body and face them, you can
Yes.
see they recognize that, okay, dad's really listening. And that's very, very valuable in all types of relationships.
Absolutely, and I'll give you one big thing too, because I like I mentioned to you earlier, I love empirical research, and just about every company I've gone to as an executive, I had talent analytics underneath me. But one of the things that we would typically do is figure out what are the factors that predicts great leadership in a company, and leadership being defined as people who inspire people, others, people who care, who show authenticity in terms of, caring about others, things like that. With that definition and start looking at all these different factors, communications typically is in the top 5 in the predictors of whether a person perceived that person to be a leader. And then that then takes into things like personal and organizational engagement. So when we start, an active listening is really one of those components that defines a leader. Most leaders who all they do is talk, 60 minutes at a meeting, and they take 45 minutes of that, and that happens every week, every day, whatever the case might be. Those people are not perceived as leaders by their direct reports, but also people in the organization. So I think it's really critical to just, make sure that people understand that there's also this empirical piece of active listening and how that active listening inspires others. Like when you turn to your son and he knows that you're looking right at him, he's inspired and motivated that, wow, I got my dad's full attention. And how you respond to that depends on how well you actively listened. So I just wanted to break down the empirical, but also the practical, how that blends in together in reality.
Yeah, and it's great to hear the empirical evidence around that, because obviously from my role, this it's what we do all day every day is help organizations, and we see it from the qualitative side, just some of the feedback that we're hearing about how it's
Right.
people are improving their skills and they're seeing career outcomes, but really to see it as well with how people across the organization are perceiving them, their direct reports, and the people throughout the organization. Fantastic. Akil, we've talked a lot about active listening, focusing in on the audience, authenticity. If you think about your communication style, and I'm sure it's been honed over years and all your experiences, who's been somebody that's perhaps had a big influence on your communication style?
Yeah, I would say two people. One person was an ex-boss of mine. She's now passed along, but she was a great communicator because um, she listened very well. Obviously, the active listening, she had that, but she always made me feel like I was the most important person to her. Even though other people will tell you the same thing that reported to her, we all felt that way. There was no one who didn't feel that way. And her clients as well. She was the head of HR for a pretty large company or division of a company that I worked at, and I reported directly to her. And she just always made me feel that way. She even made my wife feel that way. She developed a really good relationship with my wife. And so her ability to actively listen, and then whatever came out of her mouth was just very clear that she understood not only what I was communicating, but also to how I was feeling about what I was communicating. In addition, when she gave direction, it was clear, it was concise. She was a great writer. She did used to work for the UN. So she was a diplomat with the UN. So she had those skills that were just honed. And I learned a lot from her. I got to give one other person, another manager of mine. He was really good at written communications. I always thought my written communications were really good coming from college and working on dissertations and theses and all that good stuff. But from a business communications perspective with writing, he just took my skill set to the next level. And he's a former Honeywell, and I won't get into names here because of the video, but he's really, really, really good at how he writes business memos, business emails, things like that to boards, as well as the management team and all that. And he trained me in that so very well, and spent the time with me to show me, because I was interested more in how he learned how to do that. He was an English major, so that did help him. But but so those two individuals, they stand out. There was a lot of others, but those two individuals stand out the most for me.
Yeah, that's great that you had two people like that. One that were both impactful in really different areas of communication, but then were also willing to invest in you
Yes,
to kind of help you learn, help you grow. And to the first colleague you talked about it, those people are rare, but when you meet someone like that, it is powerful, and you just look forward to every time you get to hear them speak, whether it's delivering a presentation or just that one-on-one conversation. As you mentioned, you feel like the most important person in their world at that time, which is fantastic.
absolutely.
Akil, as we are wrapping up here, what piece of closing advice would you have to the listeners out there, really just around the importance of developing the skills that we talked about today and the impact it can have not only on their professional life, but their personal life?
Absolutely. Yeah, my advice is, I think the first thing is to relax, right? We're so busy with our phones, and we're very important people, to our companies, our roles, our direct reports. There's so much going on. You talked about the distractions, and sometimes it is the phone or anything like that, but sometimes it's also the distractions in our minds. Like, I got to get to this next meeting, and those sort of things. So my recommendation would be, take that 10, 15 minutes with that person and just kind of just relax. Give yourself that opportunity, that permission to relax and find a lot of joy with that person who's talking with you, and find joy in the people who you're communicating with even more broadly, because it may not always be a one-on-one. It might be a group, a group of 5 people in a conference room, or it could be a group of 100,000 people that you're communicating to. Just find that joy in connecting with others. That is so important. That would be big advice that I would give, folks. For me, I find joy in that when I'm connecting with 100,000 people, or in one of my companies, 1.1 million people, it makes me feel like, wow, I have a great opportunity to connect, and they can connect with my team and I because of the communications that are coming out. And whether those communications are things that they may not like or the things that they will like, crafting all of that, you should still have that connection and that care, those principles of care. If you can, bring yourself to actually feel that way, everything else kind of falls into place. So that would be my biggest advice. The second thing I would say is just remember that all of us, because we're so busy, make sure that whenever you're communicating, to try to be as succinct and use brevity as best as possible, to give others a chance to talk, give others a chance to communicate. And so for you to use your active listening skills and continue to practice that, they might not know you're practicing that, but you know that, and you're giving them that opportunity to really shine and communicate, whether it's something not positive or something positive. Doesn't matter. You're still actively listening to get to the bottom of whatever that solution is together.
Yes, brevity is a great thing when it comes to communication, especially the written communication that we've talked about. Sometimes you just get those emails and it's just like, oh my goodness, I gotta just come back to this later. I don't have time to read this or whatever it is, and the message is buried.
Right.
Brevity, definitely. And this idea of relax is absolutely love it. As you relax, it's going to bring down those stress levels. It's
Yes.
going to increase your ability to focus in on the person you're communicating with. And I would say, even in general, I know so many people are so busy, back to back meetings, trying to respond to emails, get documents put together. But as you can find just those minutes
Yeah.
throughout the day to just really relax, and it's turning off the email, put your phone down, and just, even everyone has something different, right? They might meditate, they might do deep breathing. I just, a couple little things that I do throughout the day, odd things that for me helps just kind of balance me out. I have a record player in my office. Sometimes it's just, for whatever reason, the process of getting the record out of the sleeve, putting it on, putting the needle on gently, those types of things help to relax me. So I've found that throughout the day when I'm in a stressful day and I have a few minutes, kind of going through some of these routines that help to calm me down a little bit and balance me out, make a huge difference in the balance of my day.
I totally agree. I do jazz. I have my little Bluetooth, and I'll play jazz, right? And then when I have a meeting, turn that off. And then after that, I put my jazz back on. I started that in college, actually, at 18 years old. And it soothes me, helps me to relax. And so whatever techniques, I love what you just brought up. I mean, whatever techniques you can use to help you, especially between meetings, to relax, get into your spot, that is going to help tremendously.
Perfect. And Akil, if folks want to connect with you, learn a little bit more about your book and the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yes, I can be reached at waltonakil at ppisolutions.org. So that's my email address. And that's probably the best way to contact me. But my book is actually on Amazon, and it's The Impact of Employee Engagement on Operating Profit. And it's a great read. It predicts, but also looks at correlations between engagement and profitability, but also looks at, is there a significant difference statistically between those that are highly engaged and those that are not? So over a 3-year time period. So definitely a good read. So please take a look at that. I think that's going to be very helpful as well.
Perfect. I will be sure to put a link to that as well as your email address in the show notes. For those of you listening, if you want to connect with Akil, look into the show notes and you will find that information there. Akil, thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Special thanks again to my guest, Akil Walton. I hope you found Akil's insights on communication and leadership as inspiring and actionable as I did. As we close this episode, remember that mastering communication is a continuous journey. Make sure to stay connected with Communicast by subscribing so you can benefit from conversations with future guests. If you found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful for your support. Leaving a rating or review is a fantastic way to let us know the impact this show has had on you. Thanks, and have a great day.